Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Canadian Story, which is brought to you by the Modern Miracle Network and my old boss, Michael Binnion. Welcome, Michael. It's good to have you on the show. I've always been incredibly impressed what you've been able to pull off with the Modern Miracle Network and the fight back that is actually happening from one of Canada's greatest industries, which is the oil and gas industry. And for all those environmentalists who will get mad at me for saying that, that's why I have Michael here to explain to you why you're wrong.
Excellent, Phil. Thank you, David. It's great to be with you in a different role and one where I can't tell you what to do.
I mean, I like that too. I prefer that. I'm my own master now.
Exactly.
So why don't you go and tell us a little bit about you have a large presence across the country in both reach with your social media network, but also in your own right on Twitter and through the op-eds you've been writing. Why don't you share with us about your most recent op-ed on pipelines and kind of, but I don't know, summarize for us what you think is going on here.
Yeah, well, we wrote this. This was we published it. Toronto Sun published it, I should say, in the day before Trudeau had his conversation with Joe Biden. So, partly tongue in cheek, but partly somewhat seriously. I wrote what I thought would be the key points that I thought Trudeau should bring up with Joe Biden in his talk about this, the cancellation of the presidential approval of the XL pipeline. And I mean, the 3 points that I suggested that he raised, which I thought were pretty reasonable points, was one is, would you be willing to do a formal review of the pipeline environmental impacts, because a lot has changed since the president was in office 4 years ago as the vice president. Two, would you bring up with the president that, what's changed has been incredible technological improvements of both in the oil and gas industry in terms of emissions and environmental impacts, but in particular on this pipeline, which would have been the lowest emissions, world leading pipeline.
And let's be clear, just because these pipelines aren't being built doesn't mean that pipelines aren't being built everywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. This of course is one of the fundamental problems, I think, with the environmental movement and Canadian oil is this idea that if you're successful in producing one less barrel of oil in Canada, that will improve the world's environment, when in fact it'll do the exact opposite. And this XL pipeline is a perfect example of that. So anyway, the point to Trudeau was to say, well, bring up these points with the president, which I think were quite. Oh, and the third point, of course, was say, you commit if after this review you still decide to cancel the pipeline, please commit to treat the province of Alberta and the pipeline company TC Energy. Please commit to treat them fairly and compensate them financially.
Well, you have to, like, the amount of money and hope. Like, there's a little town down in southern Alberta called Oyen, and they're desperate now. All of the jobs they were expecting to come in were from the construction and maintenance of that pipeline.
Yeah, I've been to Oyen. Well, I don't know if you saw it, but 11 U.S. states have sent a petition to the president to not cancel the pipeline, and the construction unions in the United States have been lobbying the government to reverse his idea to cancel the pipeline. So, and I don't know if you've seen the First Nations. Some of the First Nations, you talk about Oyen as a community, but some First Nations communities that this pipeline goes through are just as I don't know if desperate's the right word, but certainly very anxious about the impact on their community of not getting the benefit of that pipe.
Like, how many years have we been working on this pipeline now? I remember being in the Prime Minister's office and writing a memo to Harper about this issue from the Alberta political caucus perspective, and it's still ongoing. We still haven't built the thing.
I saw this really funny article, and it was talking about how China had built a massive bridge at one of the world's biggest bridges from Shanghai to somewhere somewhere in Shanghai, and they've done the whole thing from conception to design to construction. It was all done in maybe a little bit over a year, the whole thing. And then they put it beside another story with this little island that had a little ferry service that has been arguing for 40 years about whether to build a bridge or not.
40 years.
And so, we have to realize that we're at a major competitive disadvantage with economies like China when we can spend 10 years arguing about a pipeline and they can have it all, done, built, and commissioned in a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we have to get this red tape, petty tyranny of bureaucracy that has been established by certain interest groups is destroying our competitive advantage.
Yep, I think one thing that maybe we need to realize is that, and it'd be good if everyday people realize that there is a global competition, and of course, people are talking about global cooperation, and that's important too. But we need to understand none of that global cooperation comes if people don't think it's to their national competitive advantage.
Well, and I think that there's this idea within the Trudeau circles, and I guess it's a somewhat noble idea that we want to be citizens of the globe and we want to be taking care of one another. But other countries don't think that way. No, the rest of the world isn't sitting there being like, let's kumbaya. And no, they're like, there's scarce resources. We need as much of it as we can get.
Yes, and of course, if you can be cooperative in your competition, which is to say, hey, if we work together, we can both have more of those resources, or you can be competitive, straight on competitive. I'm going to get them and you're not. But either way, I think we are naive to think that the world is not a competitive place.
Yeah, and in those competitions, we have some real advantages as Albertans and Canadians in that we're one of the most pluralistic societies in the whole world. So we actually do have a global competitive advantage in terms of trade that we should be utilizing, but we're the ones that should be exporting these products. Why are we letting Venezuelan oil dominate large portions of the market?
Yeah. This is I think really core to some of the thinking that when we started Modern Miracle Network, it was really fundamental to it was this idea that Canada's strategic advantages seem to be fairly obvious when you think about it. And our main strategic advantage in a economically competitive world is that we have a lot of land and a lot of resources and few people. So, we'll never use up those resources.
Well,
so
exactly.
Our competitive advantage is ability to provide resources to economies that might have other advantages. China, shorter resources, but long on labor. Or right. Germany, excellent at
manufacturing, short on resources,
but short on resources. America, pretty good on resources, but still needs a lot of them. And, but if you look at all the world's big economies, most of them are short resources. And we're in this really enviable position of being able to provide it to them. And then as the environmentalism becomes a global concern, which there's good reason for it to be a global concern, the population is growing and there's more impact. So we should be concerned about it. Canada now has this additional strategic advantage, which you were alluding to, a responsible liberal democracy who is very focused on responsible, environmentally low impact production of those resources. So what an incredible opportunity for us to be providing those resources to the rest of the world on a lower environmental impact basis and a more socially responsible basis. It's just this huge opportunity for us. And instead, we've got this movement to say, no, we'll just shut it down.
Yeah. Well, and why do they want us to shut it down? Because the Canadians have always kind of had this insecurity, and I feel like even Albertans have it, where we feel misunderstood by the rest of the world, or we kind of hide behind this idea of being pleasant and nice. And then there's always the joke, Canadians are hewers of wood and drawers of water, right? And I'm like, what is wrong with being a hewer of wood and a drawer of water?
Well, yeah, well, if you're the world's best at it, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact,
Exactly.
it's enormously
Exactly.
it's something to be enormously proud. When you're the world's best at anything, it's something to be enormously proud of. But I would say this idea that being that primary production is a low level thing is partly what's behind this idea that we should shut it down and try. So, and this started with Pierre Trudeau, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Justin Trudeau is trying to make his father proud here by implementing some of his father's ideas, right? But Justin Trudeau started with the idea that Canada needs to stop, as you said, being primary production, which is low level, okay, this is his words, low level, low tech, and
low value added, right?
Low value added, and we need to move into, in those days it was manufacturing. We need to move into the modern manufacturing economy. Well, do you know what Pierre Trudeau did? He turned us into a branch plant economy.
Yes. Explain this concept, because this is a really important concept.
Yeah. So what? And by the way, it's happening again today. So he turns to a branch plant economy because it turns out Canada doesn't have a mass market to support mass manufacturing. That's why the free trade agreement is so important to us. It gives us access to America, who does have a mass market, manufacturing is about mass markets. China's showing us that again today. That was America's competitive advantage. And so when we said, we're going to move out of primary production and move into manufacturing, what we did is we said, well, we now become dependent on that American mass market. And what happened is, people opened up branch plants here. So, General Motors is the perfect example of where we have branch plant car manufacturing in Canada, and of course, now we've become, Ontario's become quite dependent on these big auto plants, but they're branch plants. They're run by people in America, for shareholders from America, with profits going to America, and it's not something where Canada is the global leader. We're the branch.
But we are the global leader on resource extraction. Still, we're falling behind Australia a little bit, but we are the leader.
Yep, this is right. That's exactly right. So it turned out, of course, because that was our strategic advantage. Ontario became strong at manufacturing and integrated with the American economy. And I'm totally for manufacturing. By the way, I'm just saying it's not a place where it's easy for Canada to have a global leading position to have a foundation for our economy to do other things from. And what's happening today is the same ideas coming up. We should get off of primary production and we should go into tech. We should join the big tech thing. The problem is we're going to create another branch plant economy where we do tech startups that ultimately get bought out by Amazon or Google or one of those big American tech giants, who again have the advantage of a mass market to exploit their technology and their strategic advantages.
Yeah, but the beauty of primary resource extraction is we could sell the product to anybody because everybody needs it.
Yes, there's two things that are great about primary production. One thing, and I sell this as we talk about getting into the tech, let's become tech giants like the Americans, right? BlackBerry, Canada invented the instant message. Think how ubiquitous and important that is globally today. Canada invented that, and yet a BlackBerry, was produced in Taiwan, and now they're talking about maybe in Texas. The answer at the end of the day is the instant message has been outsourced and taken over by tech giants.
Yes.
But oil and gas, like Taiwan cannot produce our oil and gas. It cannot produce our wheat. It can't produce our fish. It can't produce our softwood lumber. It can't produce our nickel, our gold, our iron ore, or any of it. It cannot be outsourced. And so they've got this enormous advantage that we can be a global leader and we can stay a global leader. And
it will help our First Nations.
Yeah, and that this idea of not two incredible things about the resource economy that only apply if we are respectfully including our First Nations. And kudos to the First Nations for the multi-decade fight they had up to the Supreme Court to say they have rights and that we have to include them respectfully. So kudos to them for doing that. But that's where we are today. We must include them respectfully. And when we do, resources are out in areas, traditional use territories for First Nations. So they don't need to move to a city to get a job there. They can have a job right where they live. And second of all, again, it can't be outsourced. It must be produced where the First Nations are. So, that opportunity cannot be taken away from me. It is, to my mind, the obvious answer for on-reserve poverty.
And let's be clear here. These things are going to be mined because we need them to build the Teslas and the solar panels and the spaceships. All of this has to come from somewhere. There's a huge lithium shortage right now. There's going to be a uranium shortage. Like, to get to this green economy, what do they need? What Canada has.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw a statistic. I never verified it, but it's got to be. It's common sense true, and it said 99% of what we use in our lives comes out of the ground.
Yes.
So I think about food comes out of the ground. Our clothing comes out of the ground. I mean, you think it's hard to think of things that we use day to day that in one sense or another didn't come out of the ground. And an environmental movement that says stop taking things out of the ground, that's ridiculous.
It's anti-human. It's anti-human.
It is anti-human. What we need to do is to figure out how to take stuff out of the ground with much lower environmental impacts. But the idea that we're going to stop taking stuff out of the ground, well, we're not going. Nobody's going to be able to live on the less than 1% of stuff that doesn't come out of the ground.
Well, and this goes back to even the movement that Peter Thiel has been pointing to. Nutrition is something that we've neglected as a society. And now it's like, what is going to help with nutrition? Freaking technology. Technology that is built with things that come out of the ground. Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. And when I saw that one thing about that 99% of what we could come out of the ground, I said, well, that's not true, because I said, well, I was only thinking about minerals and oil and gas. But then I thought about just a second, all our food comes out of the ground. Right, exactly. Everything. And I think Canadians need to reposition their mental understanding. Like, they see the big bad mine, but they don't think about the cell phone they're holding in their hand. Right? Yeah. I mean, you've been working on this for a long time, but the protesters, the environmental protesters will bring diesel freaking generators to their protests.
Yeah, well, the very name of this organization, which is the one where I work for free there, right? But
yes.
Modern Miracle Network. I mean, the reason we said Modern Miracle Network was we wanted to remind Canadians, or people in general, our whole modern society today, 200 years on from 1800 when this all started, it's all been based on technology, innovation, and energy, and we need to be proud. We need to go. Modern Miracle Network is to say, let's be proud of how the products that we produce in Canada, the primary products that we produce in Canada, oil, gas, nickel, all these things. Let's be proud of how we've created, that by doing that, how we are the fundamental building block for a society that truly is a modern miracle in terms of the way people live compared to the way they lived for tens of thousands of years before today. And
people don't understand how much better it is right now. They're just used to it. Humans acclimatize way too easily. But like, we're talking air conditioning, we're talking home heating, we're talking cell phones, we're talking all computers. All of this is just created for, like you said, we would never have been able to do any of this if we didn't have energy.
No, and a simple thing that I say, and I agree, I don't think people think about this, but by producing all these primary materials out of the ground and applying technology to them as we have, it has created incredible equality. Everybody's talking about wealth inequality, but let's just look. So let's just compare 1800, 220 years ago. 1800, there's 1 billion people in the world. more than 90%, that's 900 million people, are getting less than 2,000 calories a day and are abjectly poor.
Yeah.
Today we have 7.6 billion people in the world.
And we have an obesity crisis.
Yeah, we've got like something like 600 or 700 million people today that are getting less than 2,000 calories, far less than 10%. And what I point out to people is that every great society before ours, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Romans, were all slave-based economies. Even our medieval societies, we had serfs and peasants, and feudal societies were in some sense based on labor, subjected labor. And that's because no economy could survive without slave labor or serf labor until we started using machines, which take energy. And that's the amount of equality that we have, that our basic work is done by machines now. Like as you say, the Greeks didn't have running water, but they did have running slaves.
Right.
And today we have running water. Right.
And they were hewers of wood and drawers of water.
Yeah, well, but the Greeks, what an incredible enlightened society. They brought the world democracy. They brought the world logic. This was an incredibly enlightened society, but could not function without slave labor because there was no machines to do the work. And today, all of those people, those 90% of people that in 1800 couldn't even get enough to eat, they're all doing productive things. Like you and I, we're not. We were very unlikely to have been part of the nobility. We would have been.
I would definitely not be. I would have been a serf for sure.
Yeah, but for this modern miracle, and that even ordinary people like you and me, David, we can have dishwashers.
Yes, yeah, which is crazy if you think about it. It is one of the things that I always.
It is in one sense crazy that how good things are for people, but what's also crazy is how much better they could still get.
Yes, and that's human innovation. I always say the economists got it wrong because they're all like, the number one law of economics is scarcity, right? It's that there's a limited amount of resources. That's the number one law. That's the very first thing in the very first textbook you ever read in economics. Like, we're talking basic macroeconomics. There is scarcity of physical resources, but there's one thing that there doesn't appear to be a scarcity of: human innovation.
Yeah. That's a good point. And a lot of the mistakes that people make is by assuming a static world, and that what's scarce today will be scarce tomorrow. And it's amazing that people can hold that idea in their head when you just see how rapidly things change in our own lifetimes. Like, payphones were scarce.
Right.
They're even scarcer now, and yet it doesn't bother me.
Well, what was that kind of like? Because you are obviously on the bleeding edge of social media technology and understanding how the war of words is being waged on our industry here in Canada, right? Like, basically, there's a propaganda war out there against Alberta's industry.
Yeah, I'm been really discouraged about the way civil discourse has changed, and I'm overall optimistic. To me, it's directly related to the technology. The idea that you're starting your own podcast. This even 20 years ago was impossible. You would have needed to start a radio show.
Right.
So what that's done, of course, I call the internet the biggest it's been the biggest democratization of information since the printing press.
Right. Yeah.
And the analogy, I like to draw that analogy because I say, listen, if you were in the 1500s, and you were in Spain during the Inquisition, you may have thought the printing press wasn't such a great idea.
Yeah, what didn't go well for you?
Right, and so I think but over time, we did learn generally the responsible use of the printed word. We developed slander laws and libel laws, And we developed the concept of professional journalism and things like this to try to say, like let's be responsible about that. And of course, we all grew up with our mothers telling us, don't believe everything you read.
Yes, right. Exactly.
The problem we have on the internet is, that democratization of information means anybody's ideas can be out there, even mine today on your show.
Well, here I wanted to bring this up because this is something you understand, that almost all of the CEOs and accountants and engineers that make up the oil and gas industry, I feel like they just do not get, which is that the majority of people do not think in facts. Facts are not the currency of the mind.
Right.
Symbols are.
Yeah, no, I think that's, yeah. What I would say, I use when people gravitate to the truth. What people want to believe certain things, and it's facts that will eventually change their minds, right?
Right.
But we need to understand people are fundamentally emotional. They fundamentally do things that make them emotionally feel better, think things, believe things that make themselves feel emotionally better. And of course, if there's a stubborn fact, let's just use something simple like gravity. I would like to believe that when I step off the cliff, I could fly. But after trying it a few times and finding that I can't, I'm willing to change my beliefs. But we sometimes get that relationship backwards. We think that people seek out facts to decide what to believe, when in fact they decide what to believe, and then facts will slowly change their mind, which is why I say people gravitate to the truth.
I think smoking is a great example of this. Like, there was a long time where people just did not believe that smoking was bad for you. They didn't want to because they loved smoking. Everyone loved smoking, right? And eventually it got to the realization that it's killing us.
So it's like me and red wine. That's just like me and red wine, right?
Right. There you go. You love it, right? It's something you enjoy, but eventually you're like, oh, this isn't.
Yeah, but I guess I get. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I guess it's actually quite a lot different because red wine really is good for me, whereas the cigarette smoking isn't.
Yeah, well, even the Bible says a glass of red wine every night will be good for your health.
Yeah, but anyways, your point being is that smokers, of course, are slow to want to believe the facts that it's bad for you because they don't want to believe.
Because they're and it's not just a physical addiction; they're emotionally attached to the habit. It's that little break. It's that meditative pause every hour and a half, 2 hours. It's deep breaths. Yeah. There's all kinds of reasons for why people smoke, right? And that's why it's such a hard habit to break.
Exactly.
It's not just the physical addiction. It becomes a part of who you are.
Yeah, and I think just as an interesting discussion to just sort of segue back into the environmental movement, I think we should be clear too that this applies to us as well. And I'll take myself. I was a little slow to take on board that the global environmental impacts of primary production are serious. And I was slow to believe that because I said, well, we're already doing everything we can. We're already doing better than everybody else. And look around, things are good. These criticisms are unfair, right?
Yeah.
But I tell you, I've changed my mind. I've changed my mind, and I'll give credit, even though I argue with, and I'm, I don't like the tactics, and I think they use a lot of misinformation. Nonetheless, I think one fundamental thing that the environmentalists got right is population is growing fast, and we need to manage our environment better. Yeah. And it's really convinced me that even if Canada is the best in the world, and I believe we are the best in the world on our environmental impacts, we still need to get better. And I think that's one thing that the environmentalists did is that just being best may not be good enough. We need to be better we need to keep getting better. That gets back to your innovation point. So
my mom's like little motto for me when I was growing up was good, better, best. Never ever rest till you're good as your better and your better as your best.
Yeah, there you go. So I think I want to say that, just like the smoker analogy, 10 years ago or so, I'll say exactly 10 years ago, I was in the mindset that, look, we're doing great. Like we're best in the world. Like how much better? I used to have to say, how much better than best do these environmentalists want us to be? But I've come to realize, well, we do need to get better than our 2010 best.
Right.
And by the way, our 220 best is better than that. And by 2030, we better be better than our 2020 best too. So it's really pushed me to say, no, we need to look at this. And it's what inspired me in my company where they actually pay me to work. This is what inspired me to say, look, let's see if we could produce natural gas with zero emissions.
Yes.
And after 3 or 4 years of engineering work, and we partnered up with some of the world's biggest companies, engineering companies and service companies, we actually now believe that we can do that. Well, what an enormous improvement! Like we're talking about taking emissions from the production of natural gas down by 80%, and the only emissions that we'll create will be the ones that are in the steel that gets delivered to our site.
Right. That's nuts. That's nuts.
Yeah, but that's where I say, so we need to realize that as stuck as we think our environmental opponents are, or general public is, that that they're not seeing the facts and they're not understanding. I look back 10 years ago and say, I wasn't either. I wasn't seeing that it wasn't good enough to be best. We had to be better.
Yeah. Well, I want to go into that a little bit deeper, because isn't that kind of a philosophy of personal life too? I remember one of the things you told me when I was working for you is, I used to think that I just needed to fix my weaknesses, and all my weaknesses needed to be, fully taken care of, and then I could be, a successful person. And then you're like, David, don't do that. Just focus on your strengths.
Yeah. Well, I expect, the reason I told you that is because I did the same thing that you were doing. I mean, I actually became a tax accountant, and I'm glad I did, because it's been a great education for so many things. But I went into being a tax accountant because I wanted to work on my weaknesses of not having attention to detail and being linear in my thinking, because my thinking isn't linear, right?
Yeah.
Only later I realized, but that was my weakness. So why did I spend so much time trying to fix a weakness? Just be aware of your weaknesses and focus on your strengths. You need to be aware of your weaknesses, or you'll get yourself into trouble. But if you're aware of your weaknesses, you'll excel better by focusing on your strengths. And that gets back to our discussion about Canada. Why are we working on our weaknesses that we're not as good at precision machine parts
or
as the Germans, right? Why are we saying, we're not as good at electronics as the Japanese, we're not as good at cheap labor as the Chinese? Like, why are we trying to work on our weaknesses? Let's work with our strengths.
Like, we have abundance here. Abundance.
We're in a very fortunate position, right? And the other thing is, we're in a fortunate position that because we've taken because we live in a responsible society, we've applied enormous technology and resourcefulness to our resources.
Yes, and because we don't have that many people.
That's why we're the best in the world at it.
We don't have that many people, so we have to innovate, because we need the machines to do it. We don't have slaves.
Yeah, or cheap labor.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Canadians like to get paid well. They're not really interested in working for like minimum wage.
Yeah. By the way, just, I think one of the reasons that Canada has been escaping some of the stuff that's gone on in America with Trump and so on and so forth, the disaffected, let's call it undereducated, males or whatever, that have been a lot behind some of that movement. But one of the main reasons is that while American manufacturing jobs could be outsourced to cheap labor in China, Canadian resource jobs couldn't.
Yeah.
And so you can still be a grade 11 educated, and more today, like I'm seeing in our business, female truck drivers, female welders, female so more and more, that grade 11 educated person can go work in the resource industry. We will provide the training, and we have some of the best training in the world
for free.
We'll, as part of your job, exactly, and we will continue, we continue to pay starting wages of $27-30 an hour.
I run a roofing crew with my cousin, and these guys make more than doctors.
Right. With overtime, you come work on one of our rigs, and you're getting 10 hours a day, you're $30 an hour, you might have a grade 11 education, grade 12 education, and we've trained you, and you're making, with overtime, you're making well over, you can easily making well over 100,000. And the guys that work up towards rig supervisor are making over $200,000 a year. And that job cannot be outsourced to China.
No, because it has to be here, right here. Well, we got 5 minutes left. So I was wondering if you wanted to kind of summarize, what do you think the future of Canada could be, and what's one piece of advice for how to get there?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think that Canada has an opportunity in the 21st century to finally, like we had this promise that the 20th century was going to belong to Canada, but it really didn't. It belonged to our it belonged to our senior partners, America and other countries like that. But I think the 21st century is an opportunity for Canada to say, we want to step up to being a senior partner because we have the resources that you need, and we can sell them to Europe, to India, to China, or America.
Japan.
And I think that we need to step up and say, we're no longer going to be the junior partner to America. And we're not going to care when you cancel our pipelines, because we'll just sell it to Europe, India, or China instead. And until we do step up, focus on our strengths, start stepping up as being a senior partner in the world, as the world's best at what we do, and demand the respect from our trading partners. If you don't want to trade, if you want to play hostage politics with Canadian citizens, well, we just won't sell you our resources. If you want to cancel our pipelines, well, maybe we won't sell you our resources either. And start taking an assertive senior role, and not be the world's best responsible producers of resources and a Boy Scout. Let's be the world's best producer of resources and a senior respected partner in the world.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for the role that you played in my life and showing me a world that I didn't even know existed, in terms of basically the propaganda war that's being waged constantly between basically resource extraction and environmentalism. I think there's a way for us to be in harmony with the environmentalists. Like you said, zero emissions production, that that is something that we could transport to the whole world.
Exactly. And I think hopefully we can get Canadians on board and realize that that's something that Canadians can do.
Well, it's not, I think it's not just something we can do. I think it's something we will do.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.